With the success of the Batman, the conversation now among people is, well, we're going to get a sequel, right? I remember reading a while back that they were planning on doing a trilogy and that Matt Reeves was going to do the Batman 1, 2, and 3, and that there would be spin off shows like there was a rumor about like a Gotham City Cop show, which I think actually got canceled. There's a Penguin show starring Colin Farrell. There's a lot of other stuff they have planned that takes place in that Batverse. And I think Matt Reeves will be involved in that, kind of like what they're doing with James Gunn and the Suicide Squad. You know, they're not really doing the DCEU in the same way. The Batman takes place sort of in an alternate universe, and it looks like James Gunn will be focusing strictly on the Peacemaker and the Suicide Squad going forward, and not really being involved in other projects, at least for the time being. But the talk has been, well, if they do a Batman trilogy, who's going to be the villain for 2 and 3? Or for at least 2. And I have a little bit of a different idea here. Now, we're going to go into a very, very brief spoiler, very light spoiler for the film. It's a scene from the Batman. I'm hoping you guys have seen the film by now. But there's a scene where the Riddler in Arkham is talking to another inmate, and it's heavily implied that the guy who's talking to him is the Joker. I mean, it pretty much is the Joker, but they don't actually call him the Joker, but it's implied, and, you know, it's the Matt Reeves version of the Joker. Now, the thing is, we've seen so many great Jokers throughout the years, and most recently, we saw Joaquin Phoenix don the role, and before that, we saw Heath Ledger, like, have a legendary performance in The Dark Knight, and people still talk about that movie, and it was, you know, it came out like 14 years ago. So, having the Joker be the villain of another Batman movie, although the Joker is the Batman's primary nemesis, it also feels like, okay, another guy's playing the Joker. What could he bring to the table? Jared Leto did his Joker, and that's kind of met with some, you know, it's polarizing. I had no problem with him, but a lot of people didn't like his Joker. He's been very polarizing, so I sit here and I think, okay, do I want to see another Joker-Batman rivalry or not? Or a Joker-Batman confrontation? I feel like it's one of those things where I'm mixed on it. But if I were the one in charge, I would go one of two different directions here. Now, obviously, the Matt Reeves Batman universe, it's still a very young, inexperienced Batman. It's still a Batman that, you know, isn't a grizzled veteran, and it's also one that's very realistic, sort of like Dark Knight, but I would say maybe even more realistic than that film, at least based on the first one. So where do you go? Who do you bring in? Well, I think one thing they could do, instead of having it be the Joker, have the Joker and the Riddler working together. Have them both be the villains. Because they already somewhat built it up in this movie, even though it could just be like, oh, it's a cameo to show that Arkham already has crooks in it and that Batman has been working hard for the past 2 years. And but if they do it, right, it would sort of be kind of cool to see the Joker and the Riddler kind of screwing around with Gotham. But at the same time, how do you do that? How do you write that script without just doing the same thing as the first film? How do you write that without mimicking the first film? You know? Because the first film is really more of a detective story, talking about the Batman. And if they do another one just like it, it'll just feel like the same thing over and over again. But the Joker will bring a little bit more chaos. So they could do that. I would be kind of okay with that. But I don't want the Joker to be the sole villain. There has to be somebody else there. Something else they could do is Ra's al Ghul. Now, obviously, in the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight series, Ra's al Ghul trained Batman. Whereas in the Matt Reeves verse, it doesn't appear like that's the case. We didn't see any mention of him training under the League of, you know, Assassins or the League of Shadows or any of that stuff. So, to me, it doesn't seem like Ra's al Ghul has a history with Batman. So if he comes to Gotham, he can then challenge Batman physically. Sort of like what Bane was doing in The Dark Knight Rises, where instead of it being a mental challenge like the Riddler, we now have Batman being challenged physically as well, with Ra's al Ghul having all the tricks of the ninjas and being able to square off one-on-one against Batman. I think that would be a good villain. Of course, it would be more like the animated series Ra's al Ghul, not the Liam Neeson portrayal where he's much older but also wiser. And they could bring in the League of Shadows or the League of Assassins as the villains and actually have Batman against the entire league. We haven't really seen something like that. Even in Batman Begins, it wasn't quite like that. So I think they could do something like that and have it work. The third idea would be to bring in somebody we've never seen before. Now, there's a lot of Batman villains we have not seen on the big screen yet. We never saw Clayface. We never saw the Mad Hatter. We never saw the Clock King. We've only seen Poison Ivy once, and she would actually be a pretty good idea too, because Poison Ivy has that whole femme fatale thing, and they could play off the Poison Ivy Catwoman thing where maybe do like a love triangle situation with Pattinson, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy, because the idea of her creating like a serum that makes you fall in love or hypnotizes you, that actually, it's not something that I know of actually exists in the real world, but it is something that I could see existing in the Batverse because it's just chemicals, and it could, if there's a way to like create a chemical that will shoot up your dopamines, which I'm sure there are drugs, I mean cocaine, but I mean like something like that I think could actually work, you know what I mean, in the Matt Reeves Batverse. And I do think she could work. We haven't seen her since the Uma Thurman portrayal, which was really hammy and really cheesy. I think that she would be a good choice for a Batman villain in a sequel. Like I said, I'm trying to do something different. Riddler was all like about mental games. We now have the sexual games from Poison Ivy, which also is a mind game, and the physical threat from Ra's al Ghul. You could do Bane again, but I feel like that's been done. I feel like The Dark Knight Rises kind of did Bane really well. And doing the whole Batman breaks his back thing was done in that film very well. We can't really do that again. Now, if they want to go a little bit more obscure, they could always go with somebody like King Tut, for example, or Hugo Strange. I mean, it's not obscure for comic fans, but we've never really seen those in theaters. They could do like a Hush storyline, although it maybe would be the Riddler, maybe not, depending on how they want to tell the story. I don't think Two-Face or Killer Croc would really be a good choice. The Court of Owls could be good, in my opinion. Maybe Rupert Thorne, but these are sort of like not really important characters. They could also do a storyline where Batman, Robert Pattinson, goes into figuring out who it was that killed his parents and finds out it was Joe Chill and it wasn't Carmine Falcone. There's a lot of things they could do, but we've seen the big boys. Obviously, the Penguin was going to be back, but I don't see him being a main villain. But the ones I listed here, I think, could work. Also, we could see a Red Hood storyline. We haven't seen that at all in a live-action setting. Now, what about Mr. Freeze? I think that, people are going to remember the Joel Schumacher portrayal by Arnold Schwarzenegger, but that's not really the best Mr. Freeze. But if you go to Batman Sub-Zero, for example, that's somebody who, that's a better Mr. Freeze. Then you've got people like, the ventriloquist in Scarface. To me, that's too cheesy. It's too cheesy for me. Victor Zsasz, the cannibal, could also work. We haven't really seen Batman tackle a cannibal in a live-action film. And having Batman chase down Victor Zsasz would also be a really good little... of course, Victor Zsasz kind of has a relationship, with Batman at a couple points. Like they work together and whatnot, if I remember correctly. But that's another person who could also be... it could actually work. Like a cannibal in The Batman 2, I think, is a good idea. And again, something different that makes him different, and unique from the Riddler. I would like to see Deathstroke. And if you remember, back when the Snyderverse was still continuing, if you want to call it that, or the DCEU, the plan was to do a Deathstroke versus Batman movie with Ben Affleck. That was the plan at one point. And I kind of still want to see that, but I don't know if we ever will. I do not know if we ever will, and I feel like, I don't know, I kind of still want them to do it with those actors. I don't want them to recast everything. You know what I'm saying? I really don't. I feel like that's something that, I don't know. Now, you could also do stuff like the Dark Knights, like the evil Bruce Wayne from other universes, but I think Marvel's kind of doing that now. I wouldn't do it. I'd keep it grounded. And I think what I listed here, I think could also work. You could also go for like minor villains too, like the Black Glove. This is kind of obscure. Or like Candyman in from the future. You have I mentioned Clock King, Condiment King. Like there's a lot of different people, but to me, the ones I listed, I think would probably work the best. What do you think? Am I missing somebody? Let me know in the comments who you think should be the villain of the Batman 2, and bye.